Do you sometimes wonder how you could truly have an impact when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? How do you know you are moving in the right direction when it comes to becoming a more inclusive individual? As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod brings topics such as ethnicity, genders, sexuality, religion on the table. We talk about research and science, but also emotions, feelings, and vulnerability. We discuss allyship, advocacy, privilege, but most importantly, we talk action. Because without action, we stay still. And when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, stillness is never the answer. Welcome to As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. Chou Hallegra is the founder and CEO of Grace and Hope Consulting. She is a licensed diversity, equity, and inclusion trainer with a decade of experience in the DEI field. She uses her expertise as a mental health and disability consultant to help organizations become more efficient and profitable as they implement effective strategies to ensure well-being and belonging for all. She completed a master's degree in human services with specialization in executive leadership at Liberty University, as well as a postgraduate program in rehabilitation counseling at Utah State University. Chou is a John Maxwell certified leadership speaker, trainer, and coach, with additional certifications in mindfulness, emotional intelligence, and employee performance, just to name a few. Additionally, she is a best-selling author and a workplace well-being coach committed to helping busy professionals reduce stress, be more productive, and find balance and purpose in life. Chou is originally from Brazzaville, Congo, and currently resides in Pennsylvania, USA, but calls herself a global citizen. With a lot of lived experiences that make her relatable, Chou connects to the heart and impacts transformational change for individuals, organizations, and communities. It is with great pleasure that I welcome Chou for this latest episode of As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. Welcome to another episode of As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. I have the great pleasure to welcome a brilliant guest today. We're going to have an amazing conversation. So, Chou, welcome. Welcome to this podcast. Welcome to this episode.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Doing well.
I can't wait to hear more about you, about your story, your experience, and everything you bring on the table. I'm very excited about it. But I'll start as always with my my usual question. What's your story, Chou?
Yeah. So my story, I was originally born in Brazzaville, Congo. So kind of West Central Africa, I'll say, and came to the US back, oh boy, in the 90s, and stayed for like a year and a half, and then went back to Congo, and then came back here in the US in 2004. So I've been here the past almost 18 years. And when I came the first time, my dad actually had married a woman from here. So she had come to to live in Congo. So although I came to the US the first time at the age of 10, I was already, as my fellow African would say, Americanized, quote unquote, because I was raised by an American mom from the age of 5, and up. And so my diversity started at a young age, and although I lived in a place where everybody else looked like me, but I was not living the life that everybody else was living around me. And so I was very aware of that. And even when I tried to connect with others, I always felt kind of that divide that I was not even intended for, but people looked at you differently because, oh, she's the one with the white mom. And it just always created this, divide. But I think, even as I got older, I was living here in the US. And then when actually I got married in Morocco, in Rabat, and my now ex-husband was living there. So even going back, and there was a whole African community of people from Congo that I still couldn't connect to.
Hmm.
And it's like we spoke the same language. Why I could connect with them from my language and could say the same thing, but because I had a different upbringing, mine was a little more colorful, right, and more diversity in it. They were just that disconnect again. And so my story, which I was never intending to sharing all this, is that as I went through life, I was still like I didn't fit in.
Hmm.
From people from Congo, my black friends, I was too white, and for my white friends, I was too black, right? Just like I never fit in any box. And as I grew into who I am today and all that I do for Grace Note Consulting, I realized it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter how people define me. I learned to not put myself in any box anymore.
Hmm.
Right. And that's given me so much freedom in just accepting all the parts of me, all the things that make me me. I'm a mom, I'm a counselor, I'm a an inclusion consultant, and I'm a speaker, I'm a best-selling author, I'm a publisher, I'm a friend, and all those things make me who I am. So kind of embracing the whole concept of intersectionality. I cannot say that word right. And just being proud of all that I am, and not necessarily picking just one part of my identity.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's very interesting, and thank you for sharing this story. And I love indeed how there's like these moments when you jump from one side to another, and
Mm-hmm.
something else comes up as well. And but
Right.
it's what I find fascinating about what you're sharing is that I think it a lot of people probably who've lived in between culture, or I'm talking about culture here because
Mm-hmm.
you were sharing about growing between cultures, but actually even different communities. Sexual orientation is probably another one as well
Mm-hmm.
that's quite common, where we hear so many times that feeling from people of I don't belong anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of, well, at the beginning at least, that struggle,
Right.
and that work that you have to go through to discover actually, well, who are you really, and
Right.
what's more important, that you belong in one side, on another side, or actually that you create that belonging for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for sharing that, because I think, as you said, it is a journey of introspection,
Mm-hmm.
of being vulnerable about who we are,
Yeah.
and you definitely described it really, really well in that introduction.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And I think, I was actually talking about this with a client of mine just, maybe not even half an hour ago before we hop on this call, about how, society will always try to define you, because
Hmm.
that's what our human brains do. We see a fruit, oh, it looks yellow and it's shaped like a phone, it's a banana, right? So, it's just like our own social construct, how things are just laid out, like our brains, internalize all of that. Like, if I see
Hmm.
something, I have to name it, I have to give it some meaning, I have to give it an identity. Right. And so
Yep.
it's natural for humans to do that to each other. But often again, then we start, labeling people and only seeing one part of who they are. And if we're not careful, like you say, we start, asking ourselves, who am I? This is what this person said. This is what society says. And all of those things don't make me. That just they're only a part of who I am, right? And
Yep.
so it's always good to kind of take that power back, because we talk about also the not feeling like we belong. um there's a lot of that that's ingrained in like a mental health as well. And
Hmm.
it guys, like a mental health consultant, so when I approach include diversity, equity and inclusion, it's from that mental health lens. It's like when I don't feel like I don't belong, I automatically feel rejected, I feel put aside, right? And that, what does that send to my psyche is like, I'm not enough, I'm
Hmm.
different, but not just different, but too different to even belong to a group, right? So I'm excluded from everything. That literally does not make anyone feel good about themselves. It impacts
Yep.
people's self-esteem, impacts their ability to focus and function and be productive, right?
Hmm.
And so those things are those things that we need to address, right? So then when I start creating my own identity and start choosing who I want to be, I'm taking that power back. Instead of letting the lack of belonging crush me down, I'm creating again my own identity so that I choose where I want to belong. you
Hmm.
know and and I actually, there's a book that I wrote with other friends. It's actually called We All Belong. It's on Amazon, and also available on my website. But the thing with that is that it was kind of things that we're talking about here. And I write the beginning and the end chapter. One of the chapters is actually bring your own chair to the table. So when I
Yep.
start creating my own identity, I no longer wait for someone to create space for me, because that's where,
Mhm.
impacts, mental health, community, productivity, efficiency, and even, bottom line for businesses and companies, right? But if each one of us start valuing ourselves for who we are and start bringing our own chairs to the table, then we're breaking down those divides, right? Then we start connecting rather than disconnecting. And
Mhm.
at the end, everybody belongs because everybody bought their own chair,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
So how do you help people go through that process of discovering who they are, taking back that power and that control, and bringing their own chair?
Yeah. So when we started, first starting about how they see themselves. So I give them that, if they're in person, we'll sit down and I give them a piece of paper. I say, right, when you think about yourself, what comes to mind? Just write
Mhm.
all the anything and everything. There's no constraints here. There's no limit. There's no restriction. Anything. And people will start naming, like I said, I'm a mom. I'm a friend. I'm a divorcee. I'm a Christian. People bring anything, their faith, their personality. I'm caring. I'm loving. Like they just write anything and everything. And I'm like, well, I'm never gonna be down because I keep thinking of more things. I'm like, that's okay. And so when they get to a place where like, okay, I think I have enough for now, I say, okay, when you look at all of that, right? So all of those qualities, all of those, words or adjective, describes who you are. But if I take one of them and say, oh, you are a mom, does that give me a full picture of who you are? And like, no, that's just part of who I am. Right.
Mhm.
And so that's one way for them to start defining themselves, and then start realizing that one part of them does not make the whole them. And then so after they we do that exercise, say, okay, can you then, how would you want to be introduced? If when you
Mhm.
enter to a room, and especially we start with what the issues are. So let's say it's at work. I'll say, okay, so if you're feeling, if a place where you don't feel like you belong is at work, now that you put all these words on paper, how would you like to introduce yourself when you show up at work? Like, what do you, when you enter to any meetings, what do you want people to know? And people will write their own self introduction. And then often people will just start breaking or crying. It's like nobody took the time to even ever ask me that,
Mhm.
because people just say, oh, this is Jean from, accounting. It's like, I'm not just Jean from accounting. Then people only think all I do is numbers, right? And, they'll plan the social activities like, oh, no, she just like numbers. She might not want to come bowling with us, something as that simple. People get excluded sometimes because of the roles that they have within a company.
Yeah.
Because again, we see Jean from accounting, Jean must only love numbers. Nobody knew that Jean loves to, bake pies, and they started a book club. Maybe Jean also loves to read, but no, this is we're reading fantasy. That's not her thing. Bring her more,
Mhm.
science stuff. Again, you easily assume because of what we see out of the surface, right? So
Yeah.
when people start creating their own identity, and then we build upon it. It's not something you do just in one day. I tell them, you keep building from it. As you discover who you are, there's a lot of activities that I do with them for self-discovery, and sometimes it's going back to roles they had in the past, how those roles define them in those moments, and
Mhm.
what part of those roles they still carry today that define their identity today. So they start pulling from different places, at home, at work, in the community, in their business, how they see themselves, how they've been defining themselves. Bring that all together, and then they write their own self-introduction. And so then from that, we say, okay, who needs to see this? Who needs to know this? And sometimes, people like, I'm not sure if I'm ready to show this to my boss. Say, well, if it's not your boss, who else at work, you'll be confident enough to like, hey, this is who I am.
Mhm.
And sometimes it might be just a coworker, the next cubicle next to them, start there. If no, and some people when they're comfortable with doing that one-on-one meeting supervision with their mentor or supervisor at work, and it's like, hey, I know that, we often talk about work stuff, but I often feel like, people don't really know who I am. This is who I am. And they kind of reintroduce themselves to people who already knew them. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I didn't know that stuff about you. And people start to see them in a different way. And for them, they took the power to introduce themselves by defining who they are, how they want to know what identity they wanted to know, they wanted to shape and exhibit in that community, rather than letting
Mhm.
somebody else put labels on them and define them in the way they see them.
This is fascinating, actually. This exercise, because it's simple.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't have
it's
to be
it's a very
complicated. Right.
simple exercise, but actually
Right.
the impact behind and the influence it can have on you as an individual is
Mm-hmm.
actually huge, and definitely not that simple. It
Right.
really goes into it goes in depth into who you are. It makes you think, quite a lot about how you want to be perceived by others or seen by
Mhm.
others. And it has that huge impact, as you said at the end, about removing those assumptions. Because,
Mhm.
yeah, I think as human beings, we need to have this meaning defined,
Right, right.
but we do it with assumptions because we don't have the
Mhm.
full picture and we don't have the full information. So we need the
Right,
person
right.
across from us to share that. I love it.
Mhm.
I'm gonna definitely try it out and see.
Definitely go
Am
for
I
it. Go
am
for it.
I introducing myself in the right way, depending on the groups I'm in or not?
Right. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And even with like organizations, sometimes I know I not sometimes usually I encourage if I'm coming in as a consultant for including diversity, is that's where we start, like letting people define themselves first, the same activity they're doing as a group, and people start finding common bonds that they had but they didn't know about, right?
Mhm.
And then they take turns introducing themselves differently, and not only that helps them connect in a more deeper way, but I've had people tell, my goodness, like we thought we were doing well, that our company or unit or department was doing well, but after doing the right, we thought was like one more compliance thing we have to do, right? We have to meet that everybody's training diversity, they see as a compliance thing and just to check the box. But then once they do that, not only people feel empowered to be themselves at work, but they're able to connect with others in a more meaningful way.
Mhm.
Workplace becomes a safe place for everyone. So going first from that emotional safety. I feel emotionally safe enough to be around those people at work, and people start valuing each other more. Productivity just goes off the roof because people are it's a good place to be. Like, I want to go work and be with those people because I know them differently now. I see them differently. I collaborate with them differently. And it's just amazing. Again, very simple, right? And when I leave, I tell people start doing this for even for meetings. So people start their team meetings by like, hey, this week, who do you want to be? And it's like it's a joke person, and they laugh because I know that came from Chou, but it's a way for them to kind of reset themselves. Like, this week,
Mhm.
I'm a mom who's overwhelmed. There's so much going at home. But for a leader, whoever the leader of the team is, that becomes a very important information for you, because often leaders want to only lead for Mondays. That's, I have a
Yeah.
whole sub box about that. They come on Monday, they have all the goals that need to be achieved, all the deliverables that need to be completed, and they're no focus, like, or just no laser focus on the goals that needs to be achieved. That's leading for Monday.
Mhm.
When you start leading for Fridays, you start noticing how tired, overwhelmed, stressed out your staff is on Fridays, that they're just waiting to literally check out, of the building and check out with their pay, or, whatever, or clock off the computer because they had it, and the whole life is feeling like out of balance. But doing things like this, right? Ask like, how, just even simple, how are you doing today? How I'm supporting you. That helps you to get to know people more on a different level. And so
Mhm.
for leader, when like you're asking your team before a meeting, okay, Jean, or whoever it is, or Paul, like, who are you today? How do you want us to address you today? And that they start sharing from that place, and allow people to be vulnerable, but also as a leader, that I know how to support them. I'm not going to add another task that needs to be done in 2 hours because they're already overwhelmed, right? I start giving them more space, to breathe, and allowing them, even encouraging them to use some of those, paid sick leaves or take a mental health day,
Mhm.
because that's why those things are there for. And sometimes people don't use those benefits for their job because they feel, if I ask, people are going to be like, oh, he's leaving again or she's leaving again. But once you start connecting people how they want to be known for, or want to be
Mhm.
connected with, for connected, that helps everyone win at the end. Everyone. Yeah, I can go on and on that stuff. As you can see, I'm real passionate about it. But yeah, it's very simple stuff, but it's just getting back to those basic, and it just people feel valued and respected.
No, definitely, and I think that's a good summary. These two words, being like feeling valued and respected, because yeah, ultimately, I think what's happening is you're giving people that space
Mhm.
where they can be listened,
Yeah.
and being listened means that I can. You talked about emotional safety. I can
Mhm.
safely express what I want, who I am, what's important to me, all these things that actually are important to us, rather than, as a good example you said, I'm an
Mhm.
accountant. because
Mm-hmm.
that's ultimately not what is important. It's just a title. It's
Mm-hmm.
just another label. It's not defining fully who we are.
Right, right. Yeah, you got it.
Uh, I
Totally.
love that. And thank you for sharing as well some of these tips and tricks for leaders, because I think sometimes it's hard, I think, as a leader,
Mm-hmm.
um, to to navigate some of these challenges, because you have a diverse team, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you can expect any leader to know everything
Right.
and to know how to manage people, as well as cultural differences, as well as any
Mm-hmm.
of these other elements from diversity and inclusion, as well as, I don't know, mental health. We talked about it as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's hard sometimes for leaders, but I think this simple trick, that you gave, a simple exercise, I think is very helpful, because it creates again that conversation, and
Mm-hmm.
from there you can take it further if you need to, and you can share that support, and bring that support for people to feel safe in the
Mm-hmm.
work environment. So I think that's great tip, so thank you again for that.
Yeah, definitely. So if it's not always as hard as we think it needs to be, right? Because especially when someone say, "I'm tired, I'm burnt out," we're like, "Oh my goodness, it's a mental
Mhm.
crisis. I don't know what to do. How do I respond to that?" Right? And even not just leaders, but your coworkers. And I believe all of us are leaders in our own rights, right? So,
Mhm.
even the coworker sitting there is a leader in that moment and can support someone. So again, if people really feel like they're valued and respected, it's easier to become vulnerable. Right. When you think about it, the people that you get to know the most are the people who feel comfortable around you. If you're comfortable around you, because they probably already know and assume that you value and respect them. I won't just come to a stranger and start saying, "Oh, I'm so stressed out today." It's like, why? Like, why would you even volunteer that information, right? And so people go to work, clock in, and leave, and don't connect with others because they don't feel safe. So, when we start, kind of respecting people's identities and giving them the power back to redefine themselves and reintroduce themselves, it creates that connection, within the organization, but not just for the to get tasks done per se, but just for that need to belong, what need for belonging for all of us. But at the end of the day, we're creating a safe environment for everyone. When I do suicide prevention for organizations, that's the one thing I always start with. I say, you might not realize it, but if you create just a safe environment for everyone, your chances of reducing suicide, in your, not just in your company but in your community at large, increases, 100-fold, because
Mhm.
you're founded about things before we get to that point. You're founded about the person who has a child who's sick, and can support them before they get to a point where they can't function. Right? You're founded by things here and there because people feel already safe enough to share. So creating that safe environment starts with that, allowing people to be themselves, respecting their differences, and not using blanket statements like, like, oh,
Mhm.
blanket approaches, not just statements like, oh, like all the Indian, no, all the Indian workers or staff, this is how we're going to treat them. Like, it doesn't work that way.
No.
It doesn't work that way. I got an email recently that just like, made me upset. Like, it was a whole email about something about, that's where I guess the Indian thing come from. It doesn't matter, which culture they're, utilizing. It doesn't be Polish or Africa, it doesn't matter. But the whole email was about a workshop they're doing about how to support Indian staff in the workplace.
Mhm.
And although I get that, there's cultural differences that need to be respected, but doing things like that assume that every Indian person in that office, in that company, needs to be supported in the same way. That's not true. People can assume from me, oh yeah, she's no, she's a brown skin, she's from Africa, so I can assume, have all the stereotype, right? That she loves to clean, loves to cook, she's a good homemaker, and you'll come to find out, no, I clean and I cook, but out of necessity, not because I like to do it, right? And so I actually had that conversation with a friend, and she was saying, she's like, oh, I just assumed that you love keeping a home. I'm like, no, I don't. I don't. I will gladly, when I'm able, as I'm able, I'll gladly pay someone to come clean for me. I will gladly pay someone to come cook for me, because those things will come to me naturally. Can I cook? Yes. My family and friends appreciate what I cook. Yes. But do I want to spend all day long in the kitchen? No. I will be doing this. I will be doing what I felt was called and created to do. It's connecting with people and supporting them in, personal, professional, wellness. That's more important to me. Those are things that bring me
Mhm.
to life, right? And so, again, if I people are allowed to do all of that, be themselves. We shouldn't be boxing people. Not
No.
everybody, not every Indian person likes to eat Indian food. Vice versa. Like, speaking of just no food, for example, I say I was married, and that was what a big contention in the marriage.
Mm.
I can cook African food, but it was not something that I want to cook every day. I eat maybe more American food, or more, not just American food, but just international food per se in general,
Yeah.
than African food. But my ex-husband, that's like, we needed this African food every single day. Something as that simple became an issue. So when we start
Mhm.
doing this, oh, how to support, the support Indian people, how to support, yes, there's again, I'm not taking lightly, but there's needs, cultural needs that needs to be respected. But I'm often very careful to do things like that, because you want to make sure that you don't box everybody in that same,
Yeah.
container, and so
Definitely.
allow for individuality within a culture.
Mhm.
All accounting, that's not just about race and ethnicity, but even just roles. Not every accountant like to use, QuickBooks, right?
Yep.
Let's just be real, right? Not every podcasters like to use Zoom to record. So there's all those things, like even as simple as that. It's a lot meeting people where they are. At the end of the day, for me, it's being person centered.
Mhm.
It's not about doing to you what I think you need to do to me. It's doing to you what you need me to do to you, right? And being okay asking those questions. How can I support you? And then you get to know people, and you get to support them in ways that makes a difference, that
Mhm.
makes sense to them. Not just the easy way out, not just the way that everybody else done it, not just the way you support every Black people in your company. No, this is one Black person, and that's just part of the identity. There's all the other things, layers to who they are, that they also need supported, around.
And I think you've made a very good point here. Ultimately, as you said, it is about asking the right questions. It is about being curious and asking the person, what is it that you need support with? How can I
Mhm,
help you?
mhm.
Um, yeah, how can I be here for you and create that space?
Yeah, yeah,
Agreed.
definitely.
And so one question I thought,
Sure.
based on some of the experience you had with some of your clients and companies you worked with, what are some of the challenges that you've noticed kind of hinder being able to create that safe environment, that culture of belonging, that
Mhm.
inclusivity? What are some of the things you've noticed where you always think like, oh yeah, I'm gonna have to be very careful with that, because that's going to slow down the progress that we want to make
Right.
in that, around those topics.
Yeah, I think the first one for everything, it's, often find, hearing things like, well, that's how we always done it,
Hmm.
right? And so when I hear things like that, for me, it's a red flag. It's like these people are not ready to grow, like just being real,
Yeah.
because and that's the, I guess, the main issue. It's, finding, when people are not ready, open to growth, then everything becomes hard. Even the most, like I
Hmm.
shared here, this the strategy I shared are very simple, right? But if someone really comes with the um demeanor, like, oh, this is, I always done it, or, no, why do I have to attend a novel workshop on diversity? Right? It's like
Yep.
kind of that mentality already start creating, kind of that barrier, because like, okay, now I have to convince them and show them this is good, this is
Hmm.
beneficial, right? And the overtraining that I do, around diversity and inclusion, it's everyone at the table. And it's about power living. They actually have a whole, licensure program of that. So I'm licensed to teach that curriculum. And one thing we do is, like, everybody who comes to the table have different roles. You're going to have those people who are so reluctant to grow, to change, right?
Hmm.
And when you meet those people, it's not about, you want, at the end, you want them to see how this can benefit them and everybody else. But at the beginning, you don't want to come head on with them trying to, if you want, disempower them. Instead, use that energy, for something good. So those are the people, like, if they're not ready to grow, they're like, no, kind of a pessimist, like, not sure this is going to work. What do I have to do this again? Lean into that. And then, those people become kind of your gatekeeper as well. It's like, okay, you're not sure why you want to do this, why you have to do this again. What are your reasons for not wanting to do this? And
Mm-hmm.
then you'll be surprised how the information they provide to you becomes actually very useful to impact change at a grander scale. Because what happens often is more people will be thinking about the exact same thing, but the person who says it becomes the bad guy, quote unquote, or the bad woman because they verbalize it, but they're actually talking about something maybe everybody else thought about. And so so you kind of empower them, like, okay, we're going, thanks for being the spokesman for the group here. There's definitely some issues there that maybe I'm not aware of. Let me lean into what they're saying so that I can learn more and eventually use that to better serve this organization.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that's one thing. It's gonna come get when you get that resistance from the get-go. The other thing that I see sometimes people be, in the beginning, something new. Oh yeah, we've done diversity training, but this is a different one. It gets very engaging and it's an interactive. Everybody's coming to the table literally and working together, and everybody has a role and a part to play. People are excited, and then there's no follow through. Right. And so that's a big problem, because I can be all excited about, getting fit, but if I just go to the gym once, it doesn't help me for a long time. And I can go back and eat whatever I want and do whatever I want. It doesn't help me achieve that goal.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I often say what you do once only helps once. What you do often helps often. So with anything, any goals, any change that you're trying to impact personally, or as part of a team, you always want to have that follow through. No, so it's like, if this is what we're going to achieve now, how can we maintain it? How can we sustain this? And how do we know that we're still doing it right and it's still reaping its benefit as we want it to? So kind of having it not just, a tracking system, but, having ways to evaluate the progress that you're making. So that's
Mm-hmm.
where simple assessments are very important. So start with assessment to know this is where we are. And then these work on the strategies that we shared in the workshop and coaching and mentoring, and then at the end, this is where we want to go. So then you're able to have those, kind of track those milestones, whether it's at a month mark, 2 months, every quarter, and kind of track the progress that you're making, so that you're not always missing the mark per se, that
Mm-hmm.
you're actually meeting those goals. And if you're someone like me, when I meet a goal, then I just increase it. And I want a new goal because I want to continue to grow. Right. And so I think those are the two main things that I often counter, like the resistance from the beginning, or the lack of follow through at the end. Like the excitement just kind of trickles down and falls through the cracks. And so as leaders, we want to make sure that we keep that fire going, and the strategies to do that, whether it's incorporating things as part of meetings and trainings that's already part of incorporating in the company's calendar, for example. So it's not one more thing they have to do, it just becomes a part of everything they do.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And it made me think of something actually, and I loved your point about kind of measuring and following through, and kind of looking at these milestones and where we want to go. How can
Mhm.
we apply this at an individual level? So how can I know whether I'm making progress as an individual in becoming more inclusive?
Yeah. So I think, kind of back to the idea of bring your own chair to the table, starting there first, like, okay, what is it that I see that makes me want to bring my chair to the table? Right. Maybe I live in a community. For me, like, I shared in the book, like I said, like I share how I live in a community where we were the minority. Like, even now, actually, in my church, a community of faith, my family is the only regular, Black family that attends there.
Yeah.
And people often go, why do you still go there? I'm like, well, because I see beyond color, right? There's the things that connect me to this community more than you think, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, just never, I'll come back to your question, but another thought that just came to mind is like, why we shouldn't always judge a book by its color, so by its cover. So when you go to my faith community, you'll see my family is the only Black family there, but I can tell you probably maybe 25% of the people in that church have some connection with Africa. Some been
Mm-hmm.
missionary there, some were born there, some work there, and it just like some have families that still live there. So on the surface, they all look like they don't know anything about Africa. But when you get
Yeah.
to talk to them, you're like, whoa, it's a huge African community. There's a huge African community with this a community that does not look anything like Africa,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's why, again, we don't judge the book by its cover. But back to your question, so I need to start with, okay, what do I see that makes me want to bring my child to the table? That's how I kind of set those goals. So for me, it was in the community, even before I moved to this area and this church, it was there were not a lot of people of color doing some of the activities my families were doing, and although
Mhm.
there was no sign saying like, oh, no color people here, there was none of that, but it just like culturally people got used to just not being included, so they didn't even
Mhm.
show up. So what I decided, like, okay, now I want to change that. So I set concrete goals for my family, for myself, and my kids always came along. So we did like once a month, we'll make sure that we go to somewhere new where not a lot of people color tend to go.
Mhm.
So we still with museums, we still with parks, we start going to different shows, different events in the community, any festivals, and that was our chance to bring our chair to the table. So we set something a goal that was measurable. If it
Yeah.
was one new thing every month, and we did more than one, especially like in the summer, spring, and when it's nicer outside,
Mhm.
it was almost every week we did something new. If we could get there within an hour, sometimes 2 hour driving, we just went. And not only that, exposed my kids to so much just diversity, and just how deep and enriching that is. It
Mhm.
helped them to appreciate people of different race and background, and different abilities, but also it introduced the world to us. To
Yeah.
although we my kids, family, we all have different um, health conditions that will qualify us as like special needs, as they call it. Like, we have different, I like to call it different abilities, but people call it different disabilities, and so which you take your pick. But my point is, even that alone, introduce the world to us. It's like you don't have to always be in a wheelchair to be disabled,
Mhm.
right? We have different abilities, and but we also will still contributing to society. And so it was just by being us and doing our own thing that it opened the eyes of others. And before I knew it, people were inviting us to do things, and then I started speaking at churches and other community events, just kind of about diversity. And I remember my previous church even did something around how to welcome the strangers around us, like it was about immigrants and refugees in Pennsylvania, how that the community at large could be more welcoming. But it's still with one simple goal, just as a family, as an individual, I wanted to do one thing, one new thing each week, each month, go to a new environment, right? So then I could track it. Did I do it this month? Yes, I did. What did I learn from it? Right?
Mhm.
What do I want to tweak or do differently next time for next month? Is there something that I didn't explore? Is there someone else that can partner with me to maximize this goal for me? Right? And
Yeah.
that's when I started branching out and connecting with more people in the community. And before I knew it, we started doing all these different diversity forums and festivals, and it's been nice. It's been nice to connect with people at large. Just different for people with different backgrounds, and the different abilities. I became a better person because of it. So when we
Mhm.
bring our own chair to the table, it's not always for the other person. Yes, it's to connect with others, but it's a win-win situation.
Yep.
It's a win-win situation. Yeah.
Love it. Love it. Love these ideas. So many very concrete things to put in place. So thank you very, very much for sharing all these.
Mhm.
Um, we're coming to an end of the episode. Unfortunately, I mean,
Yeah.
there is still so much that we could unpack. But
Mhm.
what is one thing you would want to leave us with? One word of wisdom or one nugget of wisdom that you would want to leave us with?
So as you know by now, I like keeping things simple. So my famous quote around inclusion is, "Don't wait for it to happen, make it happen." And with that in mind, if you think even for businesses and corporations, don't just create those festivals. Like it's February now, it's African American History Month. People are doing all the things around Black History Month, but don't just wait for that in order to do inclusion or do diversity,
Mhm.
right? So yeah, that I think I'll leave it there. Don't wait for inclusion to happen, make it happen. Bring your own chair
Thank
to the
you.
table and be that change. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Um, if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So my website would be the best place. So it's Grace and Hope, all spelled out, consulting.com. On there, there's right on the homepage, there's a button where you can book a free consultation if you want just focus time to talk with me one-on-one. There's also a pop-up that comes up that asks how, excuse me, how can we help you today? You can send a text message there and it comes straight to me. At the bottom of the footer, there's actually on the top now, there's also social media links there. You can click and connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, even the link to the podcast. And yeah, so my website will be, it's a good one-stop shop to know all the ways you can connect with me.
Definitely, and there's definitely a lot of information on there as well that people, that will help people learn more about all the different things you do, because we talked a little bit about the world of diversity and inclusion here, but there are so many other things as well you're involved in. So thank you very much. I'll definitely put the link to the website in the notes of the episode as well, so people can reach out easily.
Thank you. Thank you so
Chou,
much.
thank you so much for being part of this episode. It was a pleasure having you here. I am very, very grateful. Once again, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here and add value.
Thank you again, and looking forward maybe to another episode, more stuff to come out from your side as well, and all the successful things that you're working on as well, to hear more about it through your website and social media. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you. Thank you, Julian.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. We'd love to hear from you. To catch all the latest from us, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.